Hi, and welcome back to U.S. History with me, Mr. Snyder, and today we are going to continue our discussion of imperialism with one of the most important events during this period of 19th century imperialism, the Spanish-American War. So your learning targets today are to talk about the causes, the major battles, and the effects of the Spanish-American War, and then the causes and consequences of the Philippine insurrection that follows. So Spain in the latter part of the 1800s is an imperial nation in decline. They've been imperializing for centuries then, but they have a few possessions left, such as Guam and the Philippines in the Pacific and Puerto Rico and Cuba in the Caribbean. Americans have sunk millions of dollars into Cuba. They have economic ties there. And in 1895, a man you can see here by the name of Jose Marti begins a war for independence from Spain. And Americans look at these Cuban rebels and they kind of go, oh, that kind of reminds us of when we were fighting for independence. So the fight reminds them of their own war for independence. Also, the brutality of the Spanish repression tactics also creates sympathy for the rebels. Spanish General Weyler uses reconcentration camps, putting these rebels together, and 10,000 die from disease or starvation. And both sides are destroying American property in Cuba, which is why it is of concern to us. So the media doesn't make this any better because William Randolph Hearst and Joseph Pulitzer are rival newspaper owners in New York, both competing for readers. And these types of newspapers they own are called yellow press, and the name comes from a popular comic strip character in these newspapers called the Yellow Kid. And yellow press and yellow journalism, same thing. They all use sensationalist headlines to exaggerate these Spanish atrocities and create sympathy for the Cuban rebels. Because they want news. They want news to print, and they're going to sensationalize, and that means like make bigger than it really is. And so what's going on in Cuba is McKinley warns Spain to make peace quickly or Americans will intervene as part of the Monroe Doctrine. And Cuban rebels intercept a letter that is published from the Spanish ambassador to the U.S., being sent back to Spain, and it calls McKinley a weak and stupid politician, and this fuels what's called jingoism, or aggressive nationalism. We're Americans. We need to protect our reputation. We're going to do everything we can to make you pay for calling McKinley a weak and stupid politician. So that sort of fans the flames and gets other people to read the newspapers. And then just as we're not sure why McKinley sent the USS Maine to Cuba, but it's one of our state-of-the-art battleships that comes from our expansion of the Navy, and it explodes in Havana Harbor, killing 266 people. The yellow press, with no evidence whatsoever, accuses Spain of blowing up the USS Maine. And McKinley orders an investigation and finds that it was probably a mine of ours that destroyed the battleship, but there's no way of knowing. And so in April, U.S. uses this to go to war with Spain. Now, at the outset of the war, in order to get the anti-imperialist vote, we had to pass the Teller Amendment, which meant if we defeat Spain, we cannot annex Cuba and bring Cuba into the United States. The major battles are George Dewey quickly taking the Philippines by surprise, and he works with Filipino nationalists there who have been working for independence for a long time, and they're led by Emilio Aguinaldo, who are also fighting for their freedom, and they help U.S. soldiers. They think, yes, the Americans are going to help us kick the Spanish out. We'll be free and independent. We'll talk about them in a little bit. Future President Roosevelt resigns his Assistant Secretary of the Navy position and leads his Rough Rider cavalry unit through Cuba to help win the war. And he's famous for helping to win the Battle of San Juan Hill and force the Spanish Navy to retreat. And they retreat to Puerto Rico, where we fight a little bit more, but pretty much the war is over at this point. 3,000 Americans are killed, but only 380 in battle. This war doesn't last through the calendar year of 1898. Mostly disease like malaria and yellow fever causes the deaths. The troops in this war are poorly trained and equipped. They have wool uniforms that they're wearing in tropical jungles in Cuba. They're issued obsolete weapons during this time, so it's kind of a miracle that we won, but we really didn't have that much of an issue with the Spanish. The Treaty of Paris ends the war, and here's what the Treaty of Paris says. Spain gives U.S. control of three things: Cuba, Puerto Rico, and Guam, and we also buy the Philippines for $20 million. Now there's a debate over whether or not the U.S. should grant independence to the Philippines outright, or since we spent $20 million on them, we might as well civilize them and control them and take them over and show them what democracy is and Christianity and all this good stuff. So at the end of the war, the U.S. has a new empire and more power in world affairs. The anti-imperialists in the United States are irate that we do not grant the Filipinos their outright independence. There's even a group called the American Anti-Imperialist League that condemns imperialism as a crime and goes against the principles of our own free government. Mark Twain is an anti-imperialist. William Jennings Bryan is an anti-imperialist. And the imperialists insist that these new territories are necessary because it gives the U.S. Navy bases for coaling stations, gives them secure bases or places to put their bases and new coaling stations for their ships. And then farmers and industrialists finally agree on something in America, that these new markets in Asia for their products is a good thing. And after this point, tropical agriculture like sugar and fruit becomes bigger business in Puerto Rico and Cuba. And because of this, the U.S. also passes the Platt Amendment, which, although we don't annex Cuba, it does put Cuban affairs under U.S. control for a long time, and it also establishes the Guantanamo Bay Naval Base, which has been there ever since. So the Treaty of Paris gives U.S. control of the Philippines. Emilio Aguinaldo is very upset by this. He does not want to just trade one imperial power for another, so he begins an insurrection or a rebellion against the United States. And since they're greatly outnumbered and greatly outmatched, they rely on guerrilla warfare or hit-and-run fighting style. And this begins... The U.S. uses tactics just as brutal as the Spanish. We put them in concentration camps, we burn entire villages, we destroy their crops, and we shoot suspected insurrectos on sight. And 5,000 Americans are killed in this war. That's more than in the Spanish-American War. And 200,000 Filipinos are killed. The fighting subsides after Aguinaldo is captured in 1901, but it does not cease for 15 years. And in 1901, William Howard Taft, the future president, is appointed governor of the Philippines, and he is no-nonsense kind of guy. He censors the press, puts these political dissidents or people who speak out against the government in jail, but he also orders the construction of schools, roads, bridges, and a public health care system developed in the Philippines with limited self-rule. We give them, they meet and form a legislature in the Philippines. And in 1916, Congress eventually passes the Jones Act, which pledges that one day the Philippines will ultimately gain their independence, and they finally do after World War II messes up the world map again. So that's all I have for you today. Make sure you're filling out those learning targets, bring any questions you have back to class, and I will see you later.